Hey, hello and welcome. And thank you for clicking on this link because I know there are so many other links you could have clicked on, but here you are, you clicked on mine. So thank you for doing that. Anyway, this is the first of many um, discussions that I'm gonna be putting out every now and then. So, but today, our first discussion will be about the resurrection of Christ. Okay, today I want to talk to you about why the resurrection is important. Okay, why is it important? And then that's the first part of my discussion. And in the second part, I'll be presenting some arguments that have been put over the years against the resurrection of Christ. Some people have tried to explain that away by using um, what 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 is referred to as naturalistic theories. Okay, they're trying to use um, come up with natural methods to explain a supernatural event. Okay, so I'm gonna be talking about a couple of those theories, and then that will be it. Okay, so I'm gonna try to keep this brief and simple. So I have my notes here, everything ready to go. So let's dive in um, to our discussion. So why is the resurrection of Christ so important, as they say? Okay, all right. So this is the first, like I said, there'll be many other discussions. So do come back every now and then, whenever you see the link, do come back to find out what we're talking about, okay? And please feel free to leave a comment also. All right, so the resurrection is basically God's power on display. He's God, he's almighty, and we shouldn't be surprised by bringing Christ back from the dead. And that's basically God's power on display. That's one importance of the resurrection of Jesus Christ. It is also a sign, what I call God entering history to redeem humanity from sin, okay, and death. So, I mean, it's very clear. In order for us to be forgiven, in order for us to be saved, Christ had to die, but that's not all. He had to also come back from the dead, okay? So that's another importance of the resurrection. And then another one is that this event in history also affirms the authority of scriptures. It affirms the authority of scriptures. How? Well, because the Bible clearly teaches about the resurrection of Christ. In fact, both the Old and New Testament teach that the Son of God, the Messiah, will die but raised from the dead. Isaiah, for example, in talking about the passion of the Christ, explains that Christ will be pierced for mankind's transgressions and ultimately die, right? That's what Isaiah said. However, as Isaiah goes on to say, he will see his offspring and prolong his days, and the will of the Lord will prosper in his hand. That's Isaiah 53:10. Okay, he will see his offspring and prolong his days, and the will of the Lord will prosper in his hand. So you cannot see your offspring, and it's not possible if you're dead. So basically, I mean, it's obvious that Isaiah was pointing to Christ's resurrection by saying that. Okay. Now, Christ's resurrection also supports the claim Jesus made about himself. Okay, during his ministry, 3 years ministry, Jesus made many claims about himself. Okay, and some of them were some of the things he said were that he was going to be arrested, be tortured, be killed, and he resurrected. Okay, so this in all those passages that you're looking at on your screen right now, Luke 18:31 to 33, John 2:19, Mark 8:31, 9:31, 10:33 to 34. All these passages, all of them, okay, they talk about Christ the suffering of Christ and his death and being raised on the third day. Okay, so look up those passages yourself because I didn't want to put them on. I want you to go and look up those passages yourself so that you can see what I'm saying, if it's true or not. Okay. Also, the resurrection of Christ proves Christ's sinless nature and divine character. Okay, it proves Christ's sinless nature and divine character. So for Psalm 16:10, if you remember, I think that's a passage that says, "You will not abandon your Holy One to Sheol. You will not allow him to see decay." Okay, and in Acts 13 is basically Luke using that passage again to make his point. Okay, so the resurrection of Christ proves Christ's sinless nature and divine character. Okay, that's one importance and also effect, I would say, of the resurrection. Now, another one is that it validates the prophecies that came out of the Old Testament. Okay, because the prophecies, the Old Testament contains a lot of prophecies about the resurrection of Christ. And in fact, Psalm 22, which you're looking at right now, in Isaiah 53, are key passages when it comes to prophecies regarding the resurrection of Christ. Especially Isaiah 53, because more than 700 years before Jesus was born, Isaiah provides details, okay? I mean, very key details of Christ's life and death, okay? And Isaiah predicted that the Messiah would be rejected, killed as a substitute sacrifice for the sins of his people. And also, Isaiah also said that the Messiah would be silent in front of his accusers, and he will be buried with the rich, and the Messiah will be with criminals in his death. Now, if you remember, when Christ was on the cross, he was flanked by two criminals, right? One on each side. So Isaiah predicted all these things, it's incredible. And that's 700 years before Christ was even born. That's some interesting stuff, okay? So the resurrection of Christ validates those prophecies, okay? They're valid, it's important that you understand that. It's important that you understand that someone made a prophecy 700 years before the event actually happens, and then 700 years later, it happens exactly as it was prophesied. So one more is that if Christ didn't come back from the dead, those of us who believe in him, we wouldn't have any hope of ever coming back from the dead either. So that's another importance or effect of the resurrection of Christ. And we have that assurance because Christ himself told us that, right? In John 14:6, remember he said, "I am the way, the life, the truth and the life," right? So he said that I am. He didn't say someone is, but he says, "I am the way, the truth, and the life." So the life is in him, right? And even in John 11:25, when he went to bring Lazarus back to life, and then these folks were crying and stuff like that, and he told Mary, "Listen, I am the resurrection. I am the resurrection and the life." So he told us that he is the resurrection and he is the life. So we believers, okay, we who believe in him, even when we die, we will live. That's the assurance. So therefore, his resurrection gives us assurance that we too will be resurrected. Amen. Now, this is something, I don't know how many of you know this or thinks about. I don't know if you knew this, but I'm sure you guys know this already. But without the resurrection of Christ, there wouldn't be any Christianity. There wouldn't be any Christianity. And if Christianity was to come about without the resurrection of Christ, it would be exactly like any other religion, empty, with no foundation. no foundation whatsoever. So the resurrection of Christ, it's what holding our Christian faith. There's nothing else holding it. Okay, there is nothing else holding it. Not even Christ's death, not even Christ's birth. It's the resurrection of Christ that's holding Christianity. That's the anchor of our faith. Okay, that's the anchor, and then that's what separates Christianity, like I said, from every other religion. Okay, I think we should be happy about that. We should be very happy about that. And like I said, that's the source, or I imply that, like, that's the source and centrality of the Christian faith. Okay? That resurrection is the source. That's where our faith comes from. Okay, without it, Christianity is useless. Without it, our faith is useless. It has no basis, no nothing. Which is what Paul was telling the believers in Corinth. When in that first letter, chapter 15, 14, and verse 17 as well. But you can read the whole from like 1 to 17 to get the whole picture. Okay, because Paul made a good point there. All right, so that's what I have as far as the importance of the resurrection. But there's so many other points that I could have listed, but for sake of time, I'm just going to keep it short and then just move on to the second part of this presentation. But when you have time, just try to think of some other additional effects or importance of the resurrection, and then try to make a list out of them. Okay. All right, now let's switch to the second part of this presentation. I'm going to talk to you about some arguments that have been put forth against the resurrection of Christ. Okay, I'm gonna be talking about them right now. So, like I said, those arguments are referred to as naturalistic theories. Okay, and so there are many of them. So I'm just gonna talk about 3 of them. The first one is the swoon theory. The next one is what's called as the hallucination theory. Okay. And the last one is the Muslim theory, or the substitutionary theory. Okay. So those 3 theories I'm going to talk about: the swoon, the hallucination, and the Muslim theory. Okay. So so let's start with the swoon theory. Basically, what does this theory says? Well, those who believe in this thing, those who's pushing it, basically say, hey, you know what? Christ didn't die. He was beaten, he was tortured, but he didn't die, and he merely fainted, swooned. He passed out. So because he passed out, he looked dead. So therefore, they put him in the tomb. And at some point, the cool of the tomb, because of the cool, it's cold in there, so he regained consciousness. Okay, and then he came out and moved the large stone to come out. Okay, he did that all by himself, right? Because, well, he wasn't dead. That's what they're saying. And then he walked all the way to where his disciples were, to convince them that he was risen. Okay, that's the swoon theory. That's the swoon theory. So how do you counteract such a theory? What do you say? I know right now you're listening to this, you're getting so many counter arguments, that you could present to the theory, and you're right. Probably all of them are right in your head, right? So because it's such a flawed theory, it just doesn't make sense. Okay, but I'm gonna use someone else's counter argument to instead of me telling you about mine. I'm gonna use someone else's. And this guy is not even, I don't think he's even a Christian, but listen to what he said. His name was David Strauss, and he was a German liberal commentator, 19th century. Listen to what he said. He says, it would be almost unthinkable for someone to believe that Jesus could have somehow survived the crucifixion process, revived in the tomb without medical assistance, or sustenance, and rolled away the heavy stone from the tomb entrance, all after having been severely beaten. Right? That makes sense, right? How would how would he do that? I mean, it's not possible. This guy, if you when you read the Bible, even that movie from Mel Gibson, The Passion of the Christ, you know, there's no way when you're looking at it, when you're reading, there's no way he would have been able to do all this. And that's what David Strauss is saying here. And then as he continues, he said, then he would have to walk a distance on feet that had just been pierced through with nails, not to mention his side that was pierced to make sure he was dead. So basically, what this commentator is saying, it's not possible. You know, the swoon theory doesn't work. Okay, it doesn't work. So now let's move to another theory, the hallucination theory. I'm sure you already know what this is referring to. Okay, well, this one is a doozy also. It says that basically Jesus somehow pre-programmed his disciples to hallucinate. He pre-programmed them to hallucinate. So basically, before he was to be arrested, you know, tortured and killed, he somehow sat down with them and did his thing that hypnotists, you know, do, using some prearranged cues, so that when the disciples would hear that, then that would come through. So let me read something for you. Okay, let me read something for you from this gentleman who's a proponent of this view. His name is Ian Wilson. He said, it is possible that Jesus prepared his disciples for his resurrection using the technique that modern hypnotists call post-hypnotic suggestion. Okay, post-hypnotic suggestion. By this means, he could have effectively conditioned them to hallucinate his appearances in response to certain prearranged cues. And he mentioned the breaking of the bread for a determined period after his death. So the breaking of the bread, if you remember, when Jesus came back from the dead, and he was with some of his disciples, and they didn't know who he was, right? They didn't recognize it was him. And then the Bible tells us he sat down with them and to eat, and then after he took the bread and broke it, that's when they remember. That's when they recognize who it was that they were sitting with. So that's basically what this gentleman is pointing to as this pre-arranged cue, you know, pre-programmed cue, which Jesus somehow put into the mind of his disciples so that they can hallucinate his return from the dead. All right, let's come up with a counter argument. I mean, I'm sure you can come up with a counter argument. I can too, but I'm gonna let an expert do that for me and for you. Okay, his name is Gary Habermas. He's an expert in the topic of the resurrection of Christ. Listen to what he said. He says, hallucinations are subjective experiences originating from individual minds. As a result of their private nature, these occurrences are not collective or contagious. Since these private events cannot be shared, the same hallucination would not have been experienced by more than one disciple at the same time. So what is he saying? He's saying, listen, a hallucination is not like the common cold or COVID-19, right? I cannot sneeze it into somebody else. If I'm hallucinating about something, you're in the room with me, you're not going to be hallucinating about the same thing. It's simply not possible. And in my research for this, I read some articles. Even experts in the medical field would tell you exactly the same thing which Habermas just said. Hallucination is a private event. It's a private thing. It's a private thing. Okay, what I'm seeing would be different from what you're seeing. Number one. Number two, when you read the Bible, it doesn't say that Christ appeared to his disciples one at a time, right? Remember there was one point where he showed up in front of like what 500 people. So you mean to tell me all these 500 people were hallucinating? I mean, you see I don't know. There's no logic in this thing. Okay, so I'm not gonna waste time on this. I'm just gonna move on to the next and last one. Basically, the Muslim theory. Okay, so what do the Muslims believe? Well, they believe that Christ, you know, didn't die on the cross. Islam flatly rejects the crucifixion. Okay, from the get-go. They believe that the person who was on the cross was a Jesus lookalike. Somehow, God took somebody else, made that person look like Jesus, and placed that person on the cross. Because to them, for Christ to die like that would be a failure on God's part, because it would mean that God has failed to protect Jesus Christ. So that shows that they don't understand why Christ had to die in the first place. Okay, so that's a different discussion. So who was it then that got killed? I mean, if it was Christ, if it was a lookalike, who was it? I mean, they don't even have a consensus among themselves as to who it was who got killed. They say maybe it was Judas. They say probably Pilate, even Pilate. Can you believe that? And they mentioned Simon of Cyrene, if you remember him. So it's like the list goes on. So nobody knows. They can't tell you who it was. I mean, they can tell you who it was. So basically, Muslims do not believe in the bodily resurrection of Christ because they do not believe he died in the first place, right? If you do not believe somebody died in the first place, then there's no way you're gonna believe he came back from the dead. So here's what I have to say, because I had to come up with something like a counter argument, of course. And apparently, I came across some passages from the Holy Book, which says something completely different. It says, oh, let me read it for you very slowly. It says, "Oh Jesus," this is God the Father talking according to their Holy Book. "Oh Jesus, I'm causing you to die and raising you to myself and cleansing you of those who do not believe until the day of resurrection," right? I'm causing you to die. I don't know. That's one. Let me show you another one. This one says, "I was a witness." This is Jesus talking, according to them. "I was a witness over them as long as I was among them. And when you caused me to die, you were their overseer, and you are witness over everything." That's two, right? I don't know if you're seeing a pattern here. And the third one says, this is Jesus talking, "Peace upon me on the day I was born, on the day I die, and on the day I will be sent forth alive." So, I mean, I think there's one more, but I didn't, for sake of time, I left it out. It seems like all three of those passages say the same thing, that Christ died, right? "I am causing you to die," the first one said. The second one says, "And when you cause me to die." And the last one says the same thing, "On the day I die." So why are they saying that he didn't die? That's very confusing. They need to explain that, okay, why is it that their Holy Book says Christ died, and then some of them are saying he didn't? Call me crazy, but this is confusing. So moving on. So we talked about the importance of the resurrection and some effects, and I presented some naturalistic theories that have been put forth over the years against the resurrections. And like I said, those are not the only theories out there. There are many more. For example, there's the stolen body theory, which is in the New Testament, by the way. If you remember, when on the third day, when the tomb was empty, and the soldiers went back to the religious people, authorities, they said, "Hey, the body's gone." So what did they say? The authorities say, "Okay, we're gonna say the disciples came and stole the body." So that theory has been there for like a little bit over 2,000 years. Okay, and then there's the spiritual resurrection theory, which says that Christ didn't really return from the dead physically. It was a spiritual resurrection. Okay, it was not a physical, bodily resurrection. And then there's also the unknown tomb theory. Oh, so we went to the wrong tomb. There's that theory too. So you can look up those three theories, to bolster your understanding when it comes to those naturalistic theories that are out there against the resurrection. Okay. So what are we to do? Okay. What are we to do? Well, the resurrection of Christ is the most powerful event, if you ask me, in all of history. And there's no other event in history that can rival it. Okay, there's none that can even come close to it. Because of the resurrection of Christ, Christianity, like I said, is in a class all by itself. And when you look at the other religions, the leaders of all those other religions are dead. Okay, and they're dead, and they were buried and stayed buried. Only our leader, the leader of Christianity, Jesus Christ, was able to vanquish death, right? And give his followers a solid hope that they too will rise from the dead at the right time, the appointed time. So what are we to do? I mean, about all this, we know it's this is the mark that separates or differentiates Christianity from other religions, right? So knowing what we know now, I mean, what are we to do? Well, my suggestion, right, I would say we can start with the local churches. I think our local churches should start preparing people or providing them with practical information to counteract or teach them in such a way that people inside the church will be equipped enough to defend the resurrection of Christ. Okay, I think that sermon, that Sunday morning sermon on the resurrection, we need to upgrade it a bit. Okay, it needs to be taught apologetically so that believers can be prepared to defend it. After all, that's what we are told in 1 Peter 3:15, to be prepared to give reason to everyone who asks, right? So we need to be prepared. And if we're not being taught how to, then how can we be prepared, right? So this responsibility falls on those of us who teach the Bible. That's our responsibility. We need to make sure we teach people properly, because it's not proper, in my view, to just, okay, yeah, Jesus came back from the dead. Okay, so what? I mean, how do you convince someone? Because nowadays people ask you tough questions. How do you counteract? How do you refute those counter arguments? Okay, we need to be prepared to do that. All right. So, yeah, Christians, we need to be educated to defend the resurrection of our Lord Jesus Christ, and we need to teach that apologetically, as I mentioned. So, to help you, right now, there are some books that I would like to recommend to you. Of course, there are many more, but those three books are written by good people in the field. For example, William Craig has a great book called Knowing the Truth About the Resurrection, Our Response to the Empty Tomb. That's a great book to have. Okay, and I've seen him in debate. He's a very good debater. And also, Josh McDowell has a book called The Resurrection Factor. That's another great book. And lastly, Gary Habermas, I used his name earlier, the professor at Liberty University. has this book called The Risen Jesus and Future Hope, which I have in my library. Okay, so you can buy either one of these books, but it would be nice if you could buy all three of them, okay, to get you started. So I hope I have convinced you enough of the importance of the resurrection of Christ. I hope I have spurred you to learn more about it so that you can defend it better. Okay. Nowadays, skeptics, they're extremely intelligent. They ask tough questions and they ask sometimes very philosophical questions. So you must be prepared to give the proper answer for the hope you have. Okay. So that's all I have for you for now. Like I said, this is the first of many. So do come back whenever you see the link for my video. Okay. Until then, may God continue to bless you. See you later.